In the 18th part of our series on Mark's Gospel, we begin chapter 3, with Jesus under surveillance at the synagogue on the Sabbath. This video covers Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Let's read verse 1 from the English Standard Version of the Bible. Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. What's the first word? Again. You can't do something again if you haven't done it before. So far in Mark's Gospel, going to the synagogue has been a common practice of Jesus, and on this day there was a man with a withered hand. The Greek word translated withered is literally having been dried up, like a desiccated plant or vegetable, with all the moisture gone. It's almost as though the man's hand was mummified. Let's go to verse 2. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. They watched him. Who are they? We're not told explicitly, but chapter 2 ended with a conflict about proper Sabbath observance between the Pharisees and Jesus. So it is probably the Pharisees who are watching Jesus to see if he heals the man on the Sabbath. For what? To celebrate a miracle? To rejoice in the man's restoration? No, so that they might accuse Jesus of violating a commandment of God. The behavior of the Pharisees here is the equivalent of going to church not to worship God, but to gather evidence against someone for worshiping God in a way you consider incorrect. How did Jesus respond? Look at verses 3 and 4. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good, or to do harm, to save life, or to kill?" But they were silent. Jesus called the man with the withered hand to himself. So what? Why does that matter? Jesus didn't shy away from the man's need. He didn't decide to wait until sundown or to get a message to the man to meet in private later. In the presence of the Pharisees, Jesus made the man and his withered hand the center of attention. What did he do next? He asked a question. Of whom? Look at the text. He said to them, plural, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?" The Pharisees came to catch Jesus in a sin. They were there to test Jesus' purity. But by asking this question, Jesus put the Pharisees to a test. If they acknowledge that the Sabbath is for doing good and not harm, then they have to concede that Jesus is not violating the commandment by healing this man. But they remained silent. They aren't here to debate righteous Sabbath keeping. They are here to trap Jesus. And because they can't answer his question without condemning themselves, they remained silent. Look at verse 5. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. How does Jesus react to their silence? With anger. The word translated anger is usually used to describe the righteous wrath of God against sin. Mark's word choice would be telling to a Jewish audience in the first century. He's saying Jesus felt the same sort of wrath that God feels toward sin, and he had grief or intense sadness at their hardness of heart. If you read the story of the Hebrew Exodus from Egypt in the Old Testament books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, there is a repeated metaphor to describe God's people. They are frequently described as stiff-necked, meaning difficult to lead, like a donkey that fights back against the halter. And they are called hard-hearted, meaning stubborn and insensitive to mercy, grace, and God's leading. As a result, they repeatedly experienced God's wrath. What do the hard-hearted Pharisees and the man with the withered, desiccated hand have in common? Both conditions cause a loss of feeling. The Pharisees have no feeling for the man's suffering and disability. They're here to see a miracle, but not to glorify God. or witness the blessing of that man, but to have grounds to accuse Jesus of sin. What did Jesus do next? He told the man to stretch out his hand, and the man's hand was restored. What does the word restored tell us? If it was restored, it was a normal hand at some point. How did Jesus restore the hand? Mark doesn't say. The implication is that Jesus' command is all it takes for the withered, dried-out hand to be restored to normal. How did the Pharisees respond? Look at verse 6. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. The Pharisees held counsel. They had a meeting together with the Herodians. Who are these groups? The Pharisees are the most conservative faction within Judaism and are focused on preserving Jewish religion, identity, and traditions. They are vehemently opposed to the outside influence of Hellenistic Roman culture and are opposed to the Jewish vassal kings that they view as collaborators with the Roman occupiers. The Herodians are people who support the Jewish kings and their collaboration with the Romans. They see economic and political benefits to the presence of the Romans and are willing to go along to get along. So when these two groups, the Pharisees and the Herodians, conspire together, it's like announcing that oil and water are forming a partnership. Dogs and cats agreed to a joint project. And what is that project? To destroy Jesus. We already know why the Pharisees want to destroy Jesus. Because he has tremendous influence and doesn't practice Judaism the way they think people must. The more Jesus rises, the less influence the Pharisees will have with the people. But why would they go to the Herodians? Why would the Herodians want to destroy Jesus? As people become more energized by Jesus' teaching and miracles, as they come to believe that he's the Messiah, they will want political action. The common expectation for the Messiah was that he would be a warrior king who would restore the kingdom to glory. For that to happen, the pagan Romans would have to go. The go-along to get-along Herodians know that an uprising by the people would bring the iron boot of Rome down upon them. So oil and water agreed. The Pharisees and the Herodians counseled together to plan the destruction of Jesus. In our next video, Mark describes the growth of the scope and reach of Jesus' influence, while the plot against him is being conceived. Thank you for watching SowhatScripture. Please subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends on social media.